Well, we're going to have a panel here, discussion. I think largely we want to answer questions that anyone has in the audience, but I think it might be nice to start briefly just with introductions so that everyone knows who we are. So I'm moderating the panel. I'm Joe Spencer. I teach here in the Department of Ancient Scripture. I'm a philosopher and a Book of Mormon scholar, and it's really a thrill to be a part of this in any form.
I'm Christian Asplund. I'm a composer. Also, I teach at BYU in the School of Music, Theory, and Composition.
I'm Kate Monson. I'm an associate professor of dance here at BYU.
I'm Kristine Haglund. I'm Christian's sister-in-law, and it's my birthday. And also, I used to be the editor of Dialogue, and I edit a lot of Mormon studies stuff.
I'm Scott Cook. Just made the movie. I'm a freelance filmmaker. Was a BYU film student, so been lucky enough to collaborate with Christian on a couple projects.
I had written in my notes, why don't we have cake? And I didn't realize it was Christine's birthday. So
Not today.
Oh, okay.
It's this week.
This week.
Yeah.
But really, why don't we have cake?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm madly scratched down a number of questions I have along the way, but I wonder if we simply start with things that anyone here would like to raise, or any questions or responses.
I would also want to know why we don't take action. No, I was wondering kind of what influences you had, because like Mr. Asplund here, it sounded like there was opera is almost what it seemed at times, but other things as well. Kind of what inspired your work besides obviously
Musical influences. It's like everything I've ever heard, which is a lot. I mean, the interesting thing is, these songs are kind of an amalgam of different styles, and even the notation is a free combination of, classical written out notation and kind of jazz lead sheet, chord symbols and things like that, and speech and chant, like singing, intoning on a single pitch, or singing without, fixed rhythms, and then, kind of like a little bit of a rock vibe here and there, and different, I don't know. The song cycle that Melissa sang, Psalm of Nephi, is quite eclectic. I think that probably if I had a composition teacher, he or she might take issue with that. I'm sure that, okay, this is not unified, this is a collection of different styles, but, and I did have my teachers tell me that, but then I don't have to listen to them anymore. I am a composition teacher, and so I just embrace that. I don't know if that answers your question.
I'll ask a quick follow-up on it. I mean, I was struck by how much chant there was, and just sort of staying on the same note, intonation, which made it feel liturgical to me at moments, right? It would sort of slide into a liturgical moment, especially when we're hearing the words of Scripture. And so I'm wondering, as it was going, as we were watching the film, how much that was a deliberate move. Is it meant to be a kind of liturgical interruption occasionally of what is otherwise more melodic?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I actually sort of formed my text setting practice a long time ago, and it's still ongoing, but again, against the wishes of most of my composition professors, I embraced a lot of things that I think I'm making straw men out of these composition teachers, but that's not worth using, or how come you don't have enough notes in this, that kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, well, how about if I just have one note? That's I guess part of my personality is to be very resistant to that kind of thing. But of course, that's what I love about non-Mormon liturgies, Catholic and Muslim and different, Jewish is things like, intoning, prose and verse, but on a single tone, and of course, any kind of, medieval chant, I've just always loved. In terms of making it feel liturgical, well, it's tricky to set Book of Mormon texts. I mean, they're wordy, and we could, you should talk about this, and maybe you can teach me, but this, they're very complex. I mean, of course, if you're a believing Latter-day Saint, as I am, then I believe that they reflect some kind of Hebraic, or maybe Reformed Egyptian, I don't know, whatever that is. But definitely I can see the patterns of this kind of repetition and saying and a lot, and all the stuff that we associate with. That's in the King James Version, that they just kind of literally translated. So that is another situation where texts that most composers would consider worthy of setting to music would avoid texts like that. And so how do you make music out of that? And my approach is to make those things that we would normally think of as being problems into virtues. And saying, well, who says you have to, why not have a jumble of words on one note or on a few notes, and then have some lyrical passages when things open up a little bit, when the syllables open up a bit, when there's more being stated in fewer words. Occasionally that does happen. So yeah, it's more being attracted to all those kind of liturgical styles of music and feeling why not use them.
Good questions from I thought I've got a question for Kate.
I'm wondering how much of that was choreographed in advance, how much of that was responsive to the music in the moment. Just speak to the experience and construction of it.
So I construct very differently when I'm collaborating with somebody than when I am working on my own. Typically when I'm working on my own, I have a very strong commitment to the philosophy that dance has its own voice, and that you have to find the voice of the piece that you're creating first and then bring other elements in. So I actually, when I'm choreographing on my own, I choreograph without music for quite a while before I even consider what music might be appropriate for what I'm creating. Obviously, it's very different when I'm collaborating with a musician, and it's even more different when I'm collaborating with Christian, which I've been lucky enough to do a handful of times now, right? Have a lot of fun together. Because I find Christian's work very specific and very dense and difficult in a good way. I really appreciate it. It's a difficulty, and that I have to kind of wiggle my way into the movement, into the place where I might have a place of support, and I'm very aware of the need to support it rather than to create another voice. So when I work with Christian stuff, I often will work through a sense of finding qualitativeness, finding and trying to support the quality of what I'm hearing, or finding gestures that would support like the words and the lyrics. But I'm trying really hard actually not to overstep or create distraction and create a whole other voice. So I'm really trying to support it. So that's always kind of first in my mind. For this particular event, I would say that the majority of that was improvisation, that I had worked through a structure for each of the pieces, I had worked through certain gestures for each of the pieces, and a dynamic kind of signature for each of the sections. But I haven't set down specific choreography. And part of that is that I'm getting older, and it's harder and harder for me to remember sequencing. So that was also part of it.
Yeah. this may be a question somewhere between you two, I don't know. But one thing that's striking for me watching the concert film as a reader and scholar of the Book of Mormon is that the dance came in at the moment we turned to 3rd Nephi, right? And it's this kind of grouping of several texts stretched across the sermons given by Christ at the climax of the Book of Mormon. But this is the moment where voice in the traditional sense and sound are not enough. This is the moment that dance has to come out as well. Wondering how that decision is made, and what's at stake in that combination, I suppose, for the two of you.
There were several kind of mini song cycles in the concert, and I gave Kate a choice. I said, "Oh, here's some possibilities," and she chose that one, which I think was a perfect choice. But I don't know that you told me how you made that choice.
I think I just made that choice based on the fact that for similar reasons, right? It was just so dynamic and, felt like very layered and dynamic and exciting material. Had this kind of thematic place to be. I just love Kate's choreography and dancing. It's just so energetic and fascinating, and I could go on, but it's fun because I wasn't, I was really focusing on the music. I could kind of see what she was doing, but I'm glad we filmed this so that I could see it, and it just really, really wonderful, and the imagery and the jewels and I don't know, it's just really cool. And also I don't know that I've ever worked with a dancer who was so flexible and adaptive, because a lot of the music I do doesn't stick with the count, like we kind of stretch and pull, and she's very good at adapting to that. It's fun. I'm not very good at counting myself. Don't have a lot of interest in squaring up in music.
I had a question regarding the film itself. So I thought it was very complex, and I really liked the language changes. But for me, it was what motivated you to after the concept and then really just as individual experiences between the audience? I think that's something that you don't always see in documentaries, and that was something that I was very interested in.
Yeah, I think Christian and I talked about this a little bit. He first asked if I could just film it. And then we kind of had a little discussion. We thought, well, maybe we can do a little bit more. I think my goal was to just kind of try to create an experience of what it was like to be there. And definitely, as you're there, it's pretty easy. You could tell kind of the conversations that would happen, and I kind of have to just get over my, fear of being intrusive to people, and just go up to them and say, hey, will you just tell me a little bit about your thoughts? And there were more. I think we cut it down just so it was not too long. And but yeah, I think just trying to create that atmosphere, because in reality, when you see a concert film, it's never just you go, you see it, you leave. You always turn to your neighbor and say something, or you have your thoughts, and so we just tried to capture that.
Can I say something about that too, Scott? So I've worked with Scott several times as well, and both with Christian and just in the dance kind of arena. And one of the fantastic things about working with Scott. Right. One of the fantastic things about working with Scott is that he's very interested in not just kind of a set shoot, that he's really interested in getting the full narrative out there, and that he's willing to shift the plan, and kind of what you're saying about me, I guess. He's willing to shift the plan on a moment's notice. We did a different project together with Christian's piece called Fragility, and we were doing a music video of that, and I think we spent maybe half an hour trying to get a perfect moth shot. Moth, and we're like, hey, God, that's actually my work. And not a lot of filmmakers will do that. They want to stick to their shot list, and Scott is really just more interested in creating the full narrative of what needs to be said.
Yeah, my favorite part about that shoot is we did a lot of swimming pool work, And I had to do a lot of swimming and jumping in the water with a suit and a tie and shoes and glasses. And at one point my glasses fell in and I had to dive down to get them. And he kept the cameras rolling. And then he's like, wait, can we try that again? So I did about 10 different shots of swimming down and getting my glasses and putting on mine in the water. Well, that's the spirit of improvisation that I just love. I think that's great.
Maybe if I can add something. So I've had the opportunity to listen to Christian and Rob's conversation a ton throughout this. And the thing that they say that always stuck with me and that I'll take from this project is this idea that when you approach some of the more, maybe what we would say monumental parts of the Book of Mormon, you didn't let it kind of freak you out, you didn't treat it any differently, you just kind of approached it. And I found that concept to be really liberating, and this idea of a lot of us, and this is myself a lot of the time included, don't want to do something unless we can do it perfect or unless we can do it up to our standards. And I've just tried to work on this attitude of, well, let's just do it. Let's just do it and see what happens. And so I'm glad that you were an example of that as well, Christian.
Scott, can I get you to talk a little bit more about, you've done work on, say, the Church's Book of Mormon videos, which are very tightly controlled, very didactic
very
in
different.
nature, right? And then you have something like this that's so much more improvisational and just deeply, deeply artistic. Speak to the two extremes of experience there, but.
Yeah, I didn't know you knew that, but I was actually thinking that. I was like, I've been able to see the Book of Mormon text in so many different ways. And I think we're at a point where we're working to do that even more, and I think there's some real value in that, is that when we, there are just so many ways we can approach a text and a story, and even truth, and for me, I feel like when I see it from those different perspectives, I just learn so much from it. And in my position right now, sometimes we have the opportunity where we will have, church projects, whether it's the Book of Mormon, and we'll be seeking people to help and collaborate with us, and sometimes they're actually not members of our faith. And so they'll write a script that'll use words that we're not really used to in our church speak, and in some ways that is so refreshing. Because it's like, oh, they're trying to put these concepts that are very familiar to us in their own words, and just shedding light and helping us learn. And so I think I've just been lucky enough to see that in both extremes, and I think Christian's totally shook it up for me. It was like, oh, I've never seen that, and seen that from that perspective, and I don't know if I can quite articulate that, but I think they're just, again, the principle of, well, how can I look at it when I do my own scripture study or my own reading, or when I create my art, how can I take a different perspective on it that can maybe shine some more truth or meaning, or even just more understanding. So.
Can I jump in there? I think there's something really interesting about the idea of improvisation based on scripture, right? Because we, and I think it's a useful corrective, because we tend to speak and even think as though the text is on the page. It means one thing, and we all know what it is, and of course we don't, right? There's a process of interpretation and innovation that's going on in our heads all the time, and we don't articulate that to each other. And so I think embodying that process and sort of making it visible is a really valuable contribution to the ways that we approach scripture.
Yeah, that's really nicely put. In fact, I'm going to push you to say more than, because one of the things that strikes me about the music all through this is that it enforces slowness with the text, right? To hear the Nephi song drawn out over a half hour. But I'm wondering, especially as a textual scholar yourself, what you're seeing along these kinds of lines as you're listening to it, watching it, what it does at the level of interpretation for someone who's not musical, but simply hearing this and thinking about the text.
Yeah. A couple of things struck me. The one piece that's almost every line starts with having been, that verb tense is so important there, and I think I've read over it, 100 times and not noticed, like, oh, we're in the, what's it even called, pluperfect? Like, it's, I'm supposed to know these things. But that condition of having been something, having seen something, having done something, is a thing that puts us in the same temporal space as the characters in the Book of Mormon in a way that, you might not notice. And I just never noticed that until I heard the repetition of the lines. Other things that there were words that felt linked in ways that I hadn't noticed. So like soul and sword and glory, that sonic,
Assonance.
yeah,
Isn't it
I mean,
assonance?
well, assonance and consonants and, yeah. But the ways that ideas fit together sonically is different than the ways that they do when we're just doing our, I'm deriving, what plot or themes, or the ways that we're taught to read literature are different than the ways that we hear.
Do you have any questions, Brian?
Could I comment, follow up on that? Well, that was the other thing. I mean, man, I keep beating up on my teachers. I won't, well, not really my teachers, but you know the phrase, Mark Twain said that Book of Mormon was chloroform in print, and that even the Book of Mormon says that the language is clumsy, and so when I started setting these texts, I actually found there's rhyme, there's assonance. Of course, it's English, but there's a lot of sonic things going on in the Book of Mormon. A lot of literary devices. They're different from, Shakespeare or whoever, but they're interesting. They're more earthy and kind of cartoonish, but in a really good way, a beautiful way, a way that's evocative to me of this really fascinating story, an unusual story, and a group of people that really has their own aesthetic. That's, again, it's not, I don't know that I'd say it's elegant, it's something else, it's cool, it's awesome, but it's not, elegant. But yeah, I'm like, okay, for chloroform and print, this has a lot of really interesting, for a musician, for a person who deals with sound, it has a lot going on, and that having been, that's kind of a cranky, account of, oh, come on, you guys got this and that, and making a list of everything that you had, but it's just very cool rhythmically as an experience,
I wanted to ask any of the panelists to reflect on any kind of insight that you got from your experience in terms of what you learned in terms of either a spiritual insight or other meaning that you brought that was new from the experience.
You ask a lot. That's my husband.
I can kind of touch, I kind of already shared mine, that point about not approaching things, and just to kind of build off of that a little bit, I think, Christian, that for me kind of became this spiritual lesson, this idea of not so much treating the text all the same, but just not having such high expectations that it even prevents me from getting into the text. So that was something that I just kind of spiritually turned on. It's just the need to it still needs to be important, but not to proportionize it. I don't know if that's it. Place too much emphasis on it, and so that I don't get into the text. Because I think, again, for me, just getting into the scriptures is where I find value.
I'm going to regret trying to talk about dance because I'm an idiot about dance. I don't know anything. But, and I don't know if you intended this, and maybe that's one of the interesting things is what you intend versus what people hear, which I think is another good thing about recording those comments after. But in the gesture, in that one piece where you were, holding with your hand and coming down from above, I read that as Zion, right? As God is bringing it from above and we're bringing it from below. And the way that you held it like something tiny and precious and fragile is a new way of thinking about Zion for me. I just thought, it is. We experience it, at least for now, in tiny moments, and holding on to them is hard.
Yeah, I already said that, but that's really awesome synthesis of energetic dancing and then gesture, I think is just genius. But, this question about intention, I mean, that's a whole, critical theory topic, but
I've done a complete seminar or two.
yeah, you know more about it than I do. But when things are really connecting in art and in collaboration, especially, it's all unintended consequences, or what is intention, And of course, as a religious person who believes in spirits and spiritual influence and energies, I have no problem with us interacting with forces unseen. I think it's all there. We are spiritual beings. So, and then I wanted to say something about approaching, for instance, when Jesus wept, and that was one of those passages where, what do? Do you accept that, or do you say, well, that's too sacred? But that was one of the ones I was thinking of. And one of the things I think is, it's my whole approach to text setting is to not force it, and to let it do its thing. That's in the back of my mind, because if something's inspired and beautiful and eternal, then you don't need to do much to it, I think.
Did you want to speak to this one, Kate?
Sure. I think the thing, well, kind of decide. Yeah. I'm going to speak to the experience of experiencing the concert itself for the first time, because we didn't really get a chance to practice together. And so I didn't know exactly who was singing and how many sections were being sung, and when we came together, I think we did such a beautiful job bringing our attention to the idea of the importance of sound in scripture, and that was in my head, but also really got magnified through the lens of letting all voices come through, because there was such a range of voices in that concert that some that I think would describe themselves as non-trained, and some that are very, very trained. And at first, I remember when I walked in, I thought I was dancing just with Christian, and then it turned out that Clayne Robison was singing one of the pieces, and I was suddenly intimidated, because Clayne Robison, I've known Clayne Robison and his name for a long time, since childhood, and just am in awe at his abilities, and still his abilities are just mind-blowing at 80-something. And I had a moment of intimidation and had to remind myself, and did remind myself actually during the concert after you had spoken, that part of the strength of that concert for me was the willingness to let any voice through, regardless, and including the non-singing voice through, regardless of maybe what that background looked like or what that training looked like. And
Oddly, I'll answer this question as well. Though I was not at the concert. Unfortunately, it happened a weekend I was away for a conference and couldn't be there. I had seen the Psalm of Nephi piece a year ago at Utah State University, though sung by a tenor rather than a soprano.
Nephi only wishes he sounded like Melissa.
And so there was, going into watching the film today, I knew part of what I would see. But what I was completely unprepared for was this speech of Anti-Nephi Lehi, the king, set to music. I'm glad there was some time after that for me to compose myself before we came up here. It's a really incredible setting, but part of what struck me about it is so many of the pieces before that, the settings before that, were sort of I and you pieces. A prayer, very much in a single subject speaking to God, or a kind of exhortation. And then suddenly this was a kind of covenantal setting. A we, let us, let us, let us, let us. And part of what it brought out was something that's easy to overlook in the didacticism of the Book of Mormon. So often it's a kind of, here's where I stand, or here's where you need to stand. But here was this very communal sense, and that floored me. So.
If I'm trying to remember when that was, who was singing that? Was that Rex?
That was Rex Kocherhans. Yeah.
Any other questions you want to? Anything else any of you want to make sure you have a chance to say that we haven't brought out?
Well, one of the things I wanted to say is that, my concept was to, because this is mentioned about not really consulting about what am I supposed to do. My approach is to get the coolest people and just don't tell them anything what to do, because I know that they'll do much better than anything I could suggest. And that was the case with all the people here, and the singers too. So I feel very privileged that to have them, create what they did.
We forgive you.
I think that's a beautiful note to end on, though, with one final line, which is best concert of all time. That was the testimonial we had. And so, thank our panelists.